And frankly, they beat the Americans fairly often if they could get them in a straight-up fight. But they couldn't crush the will to survive and be free and the willingness of a free people to endure what it took to earn its freedom. After they had won their victory and had become 13 independent states, it became obvious that the Articles of Confederation were not working very well, and so many of the very same leaders met in Philadelphia in a 55-day miraculous experience in which, at the key moment, they stopped all of their business and spent an entire day in prayer and fasting. Imagine the ACLU's response to that reality. They wrote the Constitution, but they were worried. And Jefferson, in particular, led the effort to say, the Constitution is not clear enough about the power of the American people. The Constitution is a dangerous document which could be used by some people to create a dictatorship. And so, in the very first Congress, James Madison, who was one of the co-authors of the Constitution, one of the 3 authors of the Federalist Papers, and the leading force in the first Congress, authors the Bill of Rights. Now, these are not confused people. These are not people who have been to Harvard Law School. These are people who have created governments, who won a war against the most powerful country in the world, who are determined in a calm, mature, and methodical way to create a nation capable of preserving independence and giving people their liberty, which is their due. And they have succeeded up until now. And the Second Amendment is an integral part of that. Now remember, the heart of the American experience, which no modern liberal academic wants to teach and no modern liberal news media wants to cover, is a political document. Clist and I did a movie about it and wrote a book about it, Rediscovering God in America. That political document is our Declaration of Independence, written, I will admit, here a year and 6 weeks after Mecklenburg. But it's a pretty impressive document. And what does it say? It says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. Now, why does that matter? It matters because we are the only nation in the world that says power comes from God to each one of you, and you are personally sovereign, and you loan power to the state. The state is not the center of power. The citizen is the center of power. And so why do secular socialists hate the First Amendment, and why do they hate the Second Amendment? And they do, by the way. The First Amendment has 2 provisions that drive them crazy. The first says that Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. And of course, from McCain-Feingold to all the various campaign laws, and to the most recent effort by Chuck Schumer in between, ripping off every big corporation he can get money from, to explain that the rest of us shouldn't be able to raise the money to beat him, because he should be able to raise the money to crush us, so he can remain an incumbent no matter how far his voting record is from the people of the United States. The founding fathers had a simple model. Citizens ought to have the freedom to say what they want to say, when they want to say it, and if it makes politicians uncomfortable, let them quit office and go home and be citizens again. And that leads to a very simple Campaign Reform Act. Every citizen can give what they want in after-tax income whenever they want, as long as they report it every night on the internet and you know who's supporting who, and let's have it out. And if you have an opponent who happens to take lots of money from really weird left-wing millionaires, fine. then you can go out and find really weird right-wing millionaires. You raise the same amount of money. You have a fair fight. The country gets to decide. But you have lots of free speech rather than having the incumbent politicians and the millionaires have all the advantages and the middle-class taxpayer being crushed out of the race because they can't possibly compete under the current laws. The second thing that the left hates in the First Amendment is Congress shall make no law about religion. Now remember, the Founding Fathers who wrote the First Amendment had said our rights come from our Creator. When we did Rediscovering God in America, I think we proved conclusively that virtually every Founding Father believed freedom came from faith and no government has the right to get between any individual and God. But that limitation makes it very hard to be a true socialist because it means that instead of the state being in charge and instead of politicians, for example, to take a recent case, deciding how much you should be allowed to earn based on the politician's whim about whether or not the politician likes your particular company or your industry or your personality, that in fact it is none of the politician's business because you have the God-given right to pursue happiness, and it doesn't say except when Obama's unhappy. But the Founding Fathers, who were very wise and experienced people who, after all, had risen in rebellion out of desperation because they had seen a tyrannical imperialist government using its judges and its bureaucracy with its corrupt politicians, and so they knew what was possible. And they had studied history, and they knew what had happened in the English Civil War, and they understood the danger of tyranny. And so they said to themselves, well, if we're going to tell you in writing you have the right to free speech, and we're going to tell you in writing you have the right to religion, how are we going to give you, the people, the power to enforce that? And they said, you, as a citizen, have the right to bear arms, and the government has no business trying to stop you as long as you're a legal and law-abiding citizen from being able to protect yourself. And anybody who's going to be historically honest has to admit, the people we're describing understood the right to bear arms because they routinely carried arms. These were tough people in a tough time in a tough country doing tough things, and the idea that they would allow some DC city government or some Washington federal bureaucrat to get between them and their constitutional rights, they would have said, in Jefferson's terms, was the legitimate justification for a political revolution in every generation, which is what Jefferson thought was inevitable to clean out the corruption, the arrogance, and the obsolescence that government would invariably have. Now, what's our job? Well, at the beginning of my new book, To Save America, I admit I never thought I'd write this book. I really thought that in the years when I was a junior congressman working with President Reagan, when we proved conclusively that tax cuts lead to economic growth and jobs, when we proved conclusively that you can be proud to be an American because American civic culture is the base of a healthy society, when we, in fact, defeated the Soviet Union so decisively that it disappeared, which I would have thought was a reasonably Cliff and I have done 2 movies on the end of the Soviet Empire. One is Ronald Reagan, Rendezvous with Destiny, and the other just came out as 9 Days That Changed the World, about Pope John Paul II going to Poland in 1979, and so arousing the Polish people that they never again back off from confronting the empire.